Welcome to the Search Bar, everyone, the podcast built for law firm growth. Wine is optional. I'm your host, Eric Ritter. With over 12 years in the legal space, I've seen exactly what helps law firms break through instead of burn out. This show is for law firm owners or people who work in the legal industry who want to grow, attract more leads, and grow more high-value cases. If you're ready to take action on what you hear today or want to learn more about how to grow your law firm, book a free strategy session through my Motion for Marketing Success system at digitalneighbor.com/motion, or just click the link in the show notes. Let's get to today's episode. I'm super excited. We're diving into a topic every law firm owner should consider. Even if you're not planning an exit anytime soon, building your firm like an asset with strong systems, solid structure, and real market value is one of the smartest moves you can make for long-term success. Joining me today is no other than Brian Zapf, founder and CEO of Flight Financial. Brian is a CPA, a certified exit planning advisor who helps law firm owners transform founder-dependent firms into valuable, sellable businesses, even if they think it's out of reach. With over 20 years of experience in financial strategy and business sales advisory, Brian has guided lawyers from burnout to multi-million-dollar exits. His approach is all about reclaiming time, protecting your legacy, and creating real practical exit options without getting lost in years of theoretical planning. So we're diving into the biggest reasons today why law firms aren't sellable, what sets the top 20 that are apart, and how shifting into a buyer's mindset can lead to the smartest growth decisions you've ever made. Before I welcome Brian here, I want to give my wine recommendation here at the top at the Search Bar. For today, I'm pouring a bold Napa Cabernet. It's really structured, age-worthy, and built to hold its value, just like a well-run law firm. Brian, welcome to the Search Bar. Excited for our conversation.
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me on. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So I've been listening to a lot of podcasts. You seem to really be a subject matter expert here. And recently I heard really that you said that you help lawyers improve cash flow, profitability, and growth by turning their numbers into actionable insights, thanks to your deep background in accounting and finance. So that sounds really great in theory, but I started to open up here with a question is how the heck does someone actually get started with all that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say I didn't come to it through the typical route. You know, I was good at math in school, but I wanted to be an artist, actually. And actually, you know, my parents were like, no, you can't do that. You know, you got to do something where you could eat. So I was kind of interested in law, but, you know, realized that I didn't want to have to spend so much time kind of reading and taking notes. So, you know, long story short, ended up going to business school. Ended up getting my CPA license and working in investment banking for a number of years, did some accounting work. And when COVID hit, you know, I had the opportunity actually to kind of do some soul searching, realize, you know what, I can actually go out and help, you know, law firm owners on my own. So I started my own firm, Flight Financial, initially more focused on CFO services and trying to help, you know, law firm owners, like you said, take ownership of their numbers and use them to reach their goals and grow their firms. But I realized that, you know, the best way to have kind of the best of both worlds, right? Like a law firm that serves your needs today, has the impact that you want to have, but also sets you up to preserve your legacy for tomorrow, is to ensure that it is actually not only valuable on paper from a financial perspective, but also transferable. You know, can somebody else step in and take it over? Or can it run without you if something happens to you?
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that background. So it's really interesting to see that long and winding road that took you to where you are today. So we definitely know your stuff. And I know we've known each other for a while here. And, we've talked about kind of what you do. And so I appreciate you kind of, sharing that with our listeners as well. Sure. And also, I want to speak directly to those listeners that might say, hey, I'm never going to sell my law firm. Why do you think, Brian, they should still care about all this, even if that's not on their roadmap for now?
And that's a question that I get a lot, Eric. So I appreciate you asking it here for the audience. And really, having a sellable firm is just good business strategy, even if you plan to never sell. If you look at like the values of growth, right? It's having a clear kind of stream of leads, a clear documented intake process. It's having bench strength so that your team can generate leads for the business. It's knowing that if something does happen to you, or even if you want to step away and take a vacation, that you've got the freedom to do that and support from your team. So it's just good business to have a sellable firm. It gives you that freedom, ensures that you're not the bottleneck in your firm. It can deliver great results without you. And that also attracts A players too. It makes the hiring process easier as well. If they know, okay, this is a firm, they're actually building a brand, building something valuable here. It's not just one guy that we're all trying to serve, but it's building something that can last even beyond just one person.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of great points there, from hiring, scaling, attracting that A-level talent. I'm wondering if there's any other kind of opportunities. Maybe what's the biggest opportunity that you see a lot of law firms maybe ignoring when it comes to that long-term value?
I mean, I would say that the biggest thing is just legacy. You spent a lot of your life as a lawyer building this asset, putting your blood, sweat, your tears into it. And then, a lot of times you get to the end and either, maybe you'd like to step back or do something different, or maybe there's a health scare that's coming up and you realize that you are the firm. Essentially, you've built a very stressful, very demanding job, even if it's paying you very comfortably and affording you a nice lifestyle. So it's almost like a golden handcuff situation there. And to have a sellable firm just ensures that you're not getting stuck in that situation, that you've got options is really the biggest thing. You don't have to sell. Maybe you want to still own the firm and you want to step back, have better work-life balance.
So Brian, you were talking about golden handcuffs and flexibility, and that really spoke to me as a business owner as well. A lot of times a business really becomes reliant on that person at the top making all the decisions, being the head strategist, and although, you don't have time to really get away. So it seems like that's something that you can help a law firm owner or a law firm kind of set up. How do you make that happen?
Yeah, and really it's taking a look holistically at the firm. Where are you at right now? What does the team look like? What does the financial performance look like? And where do you want to go? Like even if you don't want to have a sellable firm, we should still try to build it with that mentality in mind, at least to serve the goals that you want as an owner. Maybe it's having more of an impact in your community. Maybe it's having that freedom, to step back and take vacations with your family, or just not be working 60, 70 hours plus a week. And so it's coming up with a roadmap for what does that look like? If this is where we want to go and this is where we're at, what are kind of the 1 to 3 most impactful things that we can focus on over the next 90 days? And then breaking that down with the owner into clear action items and figuring out who on the team, or if it is the owner, who should own those action items. And then serving as that accountability checkpoint, having a check-in, giving them a scoreboard. This is how your firm did over the past, month or so. Here's where it should have been relative to the plan we set. And how do we course correct? What are the bottlenecks that are preventing us from reaching our targets?
Yeah, no, fantastic. So I want to lean into that a little bit more. We've been talking about kind of the positive side, like, hey, this is where, you can go, and this is why you should worry about this. Even if you're looking at why you should care about this, is even if you don't want to sell your law firm there, it gives you a lot of flexibility, a lot of opportunity. So let's talk about maybe those roadblocks or those speed bumps that are really kind of keeping a law firm from being sellable or giving you that flexibility, right? So I want to just quote a headline here that 80% of law firms aren't sellable. That's a powerful stat. That's a big number. Brian, why do you think that number is so high at 80%?
Well, Eric, I'd say the biggest reason is founder dependency. Most lawyers, they start law firms because they're really great at practicing the law. And so they end up focusing on what comes natural or what's easiest to them, which is that legal work. And they often neglect, or they're just not familiar with everything else that goes into owning a business, right? It's the financial side, it's the operations side, it's developing a team, having a good sales and marketing process that's separate from the firm owner. So I would say that founder dependency and feeling like you've got to be involved in every aspect of the day-to-day of the business is the biggest one. And then just outside of that, it's a lack of clear processes. If you are the sole rainmaker, that's a huge problem. A buyer's not going on,
right.
Like there's nothing for them to buy, right? Because they can't buy you. So they need to buy kind of a proven machine as opposed to just an expensive or a very demanding and time-consuming job that may pay you well.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I'm a big fan of like examples or stories, and I'm sure you've seen it. And of course, we don't need to name any names here. But do you have any firms that you've maybe worked with or you've seen that really should have been sellable, but they weren't?
Sure. Yeah. So I worked with a $3 million litigation firm, and on paper, they were thriving. Like their revenue had been growing a little over 10% year over year. They had a few other partners in the firm. They had some associates, paralegals. So they had some team, at least on paper, and the business was profitable. You know, the owners were taking out almost $1 million a year kind of total in profit through, you know, owner comp and benefits and other profit distributions.
Yeah.
But when we dug in, we realized the owner really was the firm. Like they were the ones who had to go out and do the rainmaking. They had a lot of the key client relationships. They were still very intimately involved in a lot of the legal matters. And they felt just this weight, this pressure that they couldn't even go on vacation with their family without feeling like they were coming back to, you know, a lot of fires to put out and just things falling off. And they just said like they knew they were successful on paper, but they didn't feel successful. And that's not something that a buyer is going to want to step into. You know, most buyers are looking for something that's turnkey. And in the legal industry, you know, it's harder to transfer firms. You know, historically, non-lawyers could not own law firms, although that is starting to change. Yeah. But even lawyers, you know, they don't necessarily want to buy a practice that's going to come with a lot of headaches, or that, you know, maybe what they think they have from revenue growth isn't going to materialize, you know, post-closing.
Yeah, interesting. So that's a great example, right? So kind of, it seems like it's a pattern here, is kind of being so dependent on the founder, kind of that lead attorney there. Are there any, and I know there's no such thing as a shortcut, right? But are there any maybe roadmaps or any kind of game plans that an owner could kind of install pretty quickly to help kind of with that process of kind of removing themselves a little bit for that and looking more attractive to a potential buyer?
You know, and I would say that the first way to start is kind of the vacation test. Like if you step away from your firm, even for like a short vacation, where do you feel like the biggest gaps are? So it's kind of doing that needs assessment. You know, we can come in, look holistically at the firm. What are the biggest pain points? And I would say a lot of it is that a lot of the processes are just in the founder's head, or the expectations aren't clearly communicated. So, you know, like even for like a client intake process, like laying out, here's like a checklist of what you need to do to ensure it. Yeah. And then reviewing that and saying, okay, where does the team have questions on it? Where is it not clear? And just iterating like that. But and a lot of it's basic, right? Like there's so many great AI tools these days where you can just record your screen and speak to it as you're doing a workflow. And then boom, you've got a ready-made checklist and documentation. So I would say that's the lowest hanging fruit there.
Nice. Yeah. So documentation, checklists, I think are important. And just based on personal experience working in law firms, what I've seen the most successful ones is that they have a catalog of guides and templates, right?
Yes.
Where, hey, we're following the same motion over and over again, have that template and just be able to, you know, know what you need to replace, right? You need to put in the different plaintiff, a different defendant, maybe a different county, wherever it needs to be filed, but you already have that guide and template there. And to your point, then probably that checklist that goes along with, okay, here's the checklist, here's the guide. And, that's something that I think every law firm, even, if you're just starting out, should be thinking about.
Exactly. And there's a great book, The Checklist Manifesto, that kind of speaks to that. Like even like top tier surgeons have checklists when they go in to do these, invasive procedures. So if it's good for the medical profession, I would say it applies to law firms as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. So having a good checklist, I think, is really important there. And kind of that vacation test, that spoke to me as an owner as well, right? Like that was a big, big win for me when I was able to step away, right? And for me, getting away means I'm going to go to a national park with no cell phone reception. Otherwise, I'm going to be on my phone. And being able to disconnect for a couple of days, come back and know, hey, it's not going to be on fire. The team's got it, I think, is such a big relief. And I think even, if you're not looking to sell your firm, if you're not looking, even from a financial standpoint, just from a peace of mind standpoint, I think it's worth looking into and working on towards that goal.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's just good business strategy. Like you said, even if you don't want to sell or you're not thinking of stepping back, it's good to have that in place.
Yeah, no, awesome. So we talked about kind of the negative things and, what those 80% are doing wrong. I want to shift back to the 20%, right? That cream of the crop that are doing a great job. Those firms are sellable. Maybe even sometimes at a premium, right? At a higher multiple of the revenue, of the profit there. And what are those, so we talked a little bit about it, but I want to drill in to what kind of those mindset shifts, right? Among those owners who are really building those valuable firms. What are you seeing with the firms, the clients you're working with, Brian?
Yeah, and I would say the biggest mindset shift is going from being a practitioner of the law to being more of a firm owner and really a firm steward. Because, if you want to eventually sell your firm, you've got to be thinking of that transferability piece. What is going to make it the most turnkey and the easiest for a buyer to step in? So, having, a lead generation and a closing process that functions without you as being the primary rainmaker. Investing in team development. A lot of law firm sales end up being internal transfers. So, that's not necessarily the best path for every law firm, but you want to at least have that as an option. And in order to do that, you've got to be thinking several years ahead. So bringing on lawyers now who, they're earlier in their journey, but you can mentor them and bring them into the fold and maybe help them transition into being an owner of the firm one day.
Yeah. Nice. So let's talk about a buyer, right? So if a buyer comes in for the law firm, what are they looking for? Are there specific systems, documents, numbers, financials that they expect to see?
Yeah, and the biggest thing, obviously I look at it from a finance and accounting lens as one of the lenses I look at. So making sure that you've got accurate and timely financial reporting, so your profit and loss statement, your balance sheet, making sure, for law firms, trust accounts, making sure those are all reconciled and tied out. That's a big one as well. And being able to produce support for it. So not just here's our QuickBooks, but kind of tying it out, making sure that the accounts have all been reconciled. So financial statements, then, like we'd spoken of earlier, being able to point to here's our clear SOPs, here's our checklists, here's our stockpile of assets that we've got. And then the other thing buyers want to know, some buyers might be willing to step in and kind of be involved in the day-to-day, but a lot of buyers want to treat it as more of an investment. So having a good leadership team who you can point to and say, here's who's running the ship, and the owner can step away or at least have a transition plan for that.
Nice. That makes so much sense. So one question as you were kind of talking about that came up in my mind is, and I don't know if this applies to legal, so just hang in there with me. I'm curious.
Yeah.
Because we talked about, processes that are important. We talked about having the financials in order. What about growth, right? So I know a lot of times, a buyer, private equity will look at growth of a company, right? What's that trajectory? And I know every firm's a little bit different, right? Like a personal injury can be very different than, a some kind of corporate law firm that has ongoing retainers, right, on a monthly basis. But is that something you should worry about as well as kind of growth of the firm?
Yeah, definitely. And it depends on who the buyer is for what they want to see from a growth perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned private equity, and they're looking at kind of stable, steady, consistent growth. So, recurring revenues, obviously a big value driver, and that can influence your multiple. The more of that you have, that de-risks the business because, the buyer knows, okay, this is likely to continue post-closing. And even if it's not like recurring contractual revenue, if it's reoccurring revenue, so like long-standing client relationships, and on the client spot too, not having a ton of client concentration. Like if there's one or two really large clients who make up the most of your revenue, what's a buyer going to do if those relationships disappear after you leave? Yeah. So having diversity to the revenue, good revenue recurrence, and then a lot of law firms and businesses in general underinvest in sales and marketing. And so for a law firm to be having a healthy growth trajectory, you really want to be looking at 8 to 12% of your revenues year over year as kind of an investment in sales and marketing to help support your growth.
Fantastic. I had not heard that percentage before, Brian, so I appreciate you sharing that because that's a great insight especially for me, for someone who sits on that marketing side and is looking to help law firms grow there. So that's interesting, from a growth standpoint. So let me ask a follow-up question there, and you might not have an answer, right? Are certain law firms, easier to kind of sell than others, like, private equity than, some maybe a corporate counsel law firm or something like that helps, with counseling?
Definitely. And I would say, at least having some kind of a team in place is a little easier. And then from a practice area perspective, I would say looking at firms that naturally lend themselves to more of a recurring revenue model, or at least more of a revenue predictability model where it's easier to forecast. So, certain practice areas that I like and have seen success with: estate law and elder planning. I would say personal injury can be a good practice area. Business and business litigation can potentially be, if they're looking at like that general counsel kind of outsourced model. And some family law firms can also be good. It just kind of depends on, is there a growth mindset and is there bench strength to the team there?
Nice. Interesting. All right. So anyone out there studying law, hopefully you're taking notes. So Brian's letting you know what kind of law firm or what practice areas you guys should go and look at. So thanks for that, Brian. I'm curious,
and I guess one other point on that too, right? So kind of the opposite of the predictability would be if there's a lot of lumpiness to the revenue, right? Where it's more kind of criminal defense, or where there's a high kind of contingency based fee on the back end and less predictability to it. I would say those are probably less attractive to a buyers, but not impossible. It's just you'd have to find more of a specialist willing to take that on.
Interesting. Okay. So you threw a lot out there, right? A lot of things that you really should be thinking about and looking at. And so I'm just curious, even if you have zero plans to exit anytime soon, right? And you're just like, hey, maybe I should start getting my stuff in order. How far ahead should someone be thinking or planning? Are we talking about weeks, months, years here? How far ahead should we be planning here, Brian?
There's a saying I love that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time is now. But really, from a practical perspective, ideally you're thinking about it at least 3 to 5 years before an exit. But that's not to say it's impossible. Like if you realize you want to get out of your firm this year, there are still things that you can potentially do to not necessarily increase the value, but at least make the firm more transferable. And some of those de-risking things that we talked about, like process documentation, I would say is a big one there.
All right. So if you didn't start yesterday, start today, right?
Yeah. No time like the present.
No time like the present. Very cool. So I think I want to talk about your checklist here, Brian. So I always like wrapping the episodes with checklists. We have a 5, and you even talked about how important checklists are, right? So here's maybe an SOP, a checklist for 5 ways to make the law firm sellable. And trying to keep it simple here. And obviously, guys, as I said upfront, Brian is a subject matter expert in this. So if you have any questions, Brian will give his contact info at the end so you can ask some more. So I'm just going to go ahead through the 5 different points on the checklist here, Brian, and then you can just elaborate on them if that works.
Yep, sure thing.
Awesome. So number 1, and you guys have heard all of these before, so we're just wrapping them up here and underlining them. So number 1 on the checklist to 5 ways to make your law firm sellable is systemize client intake and fulfillment.
Yep. So again, like we said, have a checklist for kind of what is the basic consistent intake procedure, have ownership on the team for who's handling it, and have a review process as well. Like if you can record intake conversations, if you can review work kind of on a spot check basis and give real-time feedback to the team, that'll help a lot.
That's a great pro tip, right? Just record and analyze. And, every telemarketer does that, right? I'm not afraid to share. When I was in college, I had a telemarketing job and they're recording those calls and like how good you did there. So why not do it for your intake team as well?
Yep.
Feel better. All right, let's move on to number 2. Build processes independent of the owner. And I think that's a really important one. We talked about that quite a bit.
Yeah. And so I would say this can start with the owner just taking a quick inventory, just brain dumping out on paper. What are the key processes that they're involved in that they don't feel like somebody else on the team could handle today? Mm-hmm. And then figuring out what would it look like if somebody was to take that over. And it's baby steps from there, but figuring out, okay, how do we actually get somebody into the fold on this? And it could even be like we talked about, recording what you're currently doing and then getting somebody else who isn't you to ask you questions and poke holes in what you're doing.
I think that's fantastic advice, right? Like if you don't know where to start, just make a list and start writing it all out. And then you can figure out where those gaps, and you can, just like eating an elephant, you don't eat it in one bite, one bite at a time, right? You got to start somewhere.
I've never eaten an elephant physically, but I'm curious on that.
Yeah, me too. I just like the saying, because it makes sense. But to your point, it's something I've never personally done and probably would never want to do, quite frankly.
Yeah, it is a great saying, though.
Yeah, awesome. So let's move on to number 3, which I think is really big part of your wheelhouse here, is document your key financials and also marketing assets, maybe.
Yep. Yeah. So, most law firms, once they've reached the million plus size, at least have a bookkeeper in place. But it helps to have an advisor who's helping you, or even yourself, just reviewing your numbers at least on a monthly basis, and kind of the core numbers, right? You want to know what your revenue is, ideally gross profit, if you're tracking that. You want to know kind of the big buckets, how much you're spending percentage wise on marketing, on your personnel and payroll, because that's a huge cost for law firms. And then lastly, just on your overhead and operational cost, and being able to explain to a buyer, here's our profit, and then here's kind of where things are translating into cash flow in the bank.
Makes sense, right? And again, the sooner the better. And sometimes it needs to be more than just a bookkeeper, right? It needs someone who has kind of a bigger picture overview, right? Whether that's, maybe a fractional CFO or something like that, Brian.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you are serious about making sure that your firm is sellable, or even just growing the firm, it helps to have a fractional CFO.
Nice. All right, let's look at number 4, which I think speaks to a lot of the other points as well, which is just creating that growth engine that runs without you, the owner.
Yeah, and really the growth engine comes down to your wheelhouse as well, Eric, right? That sales and marketing piece of it, Is there a brand for the firm that's separate from, the owner's personal brand? Is there kind of a clear lead generation approach? Are you investing in the right leads and the right marketing? And is there bench strength? Is there bench strength? Are there people on the team who can handle that process outside of you as the founder? And like we said, right, like if you're serious about actually having a growth engine, that requires investment. So, 8 to 12% of revenue is a good benchmark for your sales and marketing investment. And then reviewing that regularly to see what type of return are we getting, on our ad spend. What is our client acquisition cost? How much are our leads costing us relative to the long-term value that we're getting from those clients?
Makes so much sense, right? And I think the final one, number 5 here, shift your mindset from operator to owner.
Yeah, that's the big thing, right? As an operator, you're thinking about doing great legal work. But as an owner or a good steward, you're thinking bigger. You're thinking, how do you create a machine, a system that delivers great legal work without your direct day-to-day involvement in it? And how are you ensuring that what you've built can survive if something happens to you, or even if you just want to step back or sell?
Yeah, awesome. I think we made it through. This is such a useful episode today, Brian. Thank you so much to Brian Zapf for joining me today, joining us here and breaking down how to future-proof your law firm by treating it like the asset it truly is. Brian, before we sign off, can you share with our listeners where they can find you online or learn more about your work?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm active on LinkedIn. So BDZAPF is my LinkedIn handle. You can follow me there. Or you can visit my website at flight.financial.
Nice. That's super simple. Flight.financial. I love it. And if this episode got you thinking and you're ready to grow with more clarity, more systems, and more long-term value, you can also book your free marketing strategy session through our Motion for Marketing Success system, where I'll help you map out exactly what you need to optimize next. No pressure, just consultation. Link is going to be in the show notes. And if you found this episode helpful, leave a review, send it to a colleague, and keep building something that lasts. And again, today's wine was a Napa Cabernet, structured, smart, and built for aging just like the best firms. Until next time, grab your glass, think like a buyer, and let's build something that lasts. Cheers, everyone.